The auctioneer's gavel cracked while my cattle trailer still rattled dust into the courthouse lot. By the time I killed the engine, the sound had already done its damage. One sharp wooden pop inside that brick building, and 6,800 acres of my family's land was being sold like a busted lawn mower on a Saturday curb. The trailer behind me groaned as the horses shifted their weight. Diesel fumes drifted up through the cab vents. My phone buzzed again on the seat beside me, the screen lit with 3 missed calls from Travis Boone and 1 text from my foreman, Caleb. They started early. Started early. That was the first lie I could prove. I stepped out into heat rising off the blacktop in greasy waves, boots hitting gravel hard enough to sting through the soles. The courthouse steps were crowded with pressed shirts, polished belt buckles, and the kind of faces that never looked at a ranch unless they planned to divide it into lots. I saw Wade Mercer first. Clean white hat, blue tie, hands folded like he was at church instead of circling my land like a vulture. Next to him stood Ellis Vargo, holding a slim file tucked under one arm, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the courtroom doors. And then I saw Travis. He was halfway down the steps, moving too fast, not looking at me. His face had gone the color of old paper. He had signed the sale papers on a temporary operating agreement 6 months earlier, back when he was still my business partner and still pretending short-term debt was our only problem. Now he looked like a man who had just lit a fuse and heard it reach the dynamite. "Grant," he said, raising one hand like that could stop anything. I didn't answer him. I brushed past so hard his shoulder clipped the courthouse rail. Inside, the air smelled like floor wax, copier toner, and old paper. It hit me with a memory so strong it almost stopped me cold. My father standing in that same hallway 30 years ago, hat in both hands, telling me never to trust a signed promise unless I'd seen where it got recorded. That lesson had put me in county offices more times than I cared to count. It was the only reason I knew what was wrong before anyone opened their mouth. The notice board on the wall was half empty. The foreclosure docket should have had 3 postings. Initial filing, public notice, confirmation of sale. I saw 1 sheet pinned crooked under county tax updates and a flyer for a livestock vaccine clinic. Fresh tack holes above it. Missing paper. Missing dates. Naomi Pike was behind the records counter at the end of the hall, sorting stamped envelopes with both hands moving and her eyes carefully not lifting. That told me more than any greeting would have. Naomi didn't rattle easy. We'd known each other long enough for me to recognize fear when she wore it. I crossed the hall. How many notices went up? Her fingers froze on the stack. "Grant," she said quietly, still not looking at me. "You need to keep your voice down." That's not an answer. She glanced toward the courtroom doors, then toward a side office with the blinds shut. It changed this morning. There it was. Not a rumor. Not a delay. A real move already made. How? I can't discuss it here. Too bad for everyone involved, because here was exactly where I intended to discuss it. Behind me, the courtroom door opened, and a deputy stepped out with a banker's box hugged against his chest. Red file tabs stuck out from the top. One of them had my ranch parcel number written in black marker. He headed toward the clerk intake room, not toward archives, toward processing. That box held the chain that would turn a crooked hearing into a clean title transfer by lunchtime. I moved before I thought twice. The deputy said my name sharp and low, but I was already at the intake door, one hand on the metal handle. The metal handle bit cold into my palm, and the intake room smelled like dust, burnt coffee, and fresh toner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead hard enough to make my teeth ache. Through the narrow wired glass pane, I saw Ellis Vargo set that banker's box on the counter like he was placing a bet he already knew he'd win. I shoved the door open. A county legal staffer behind the intake window looked up so fast her reading glasses slipped down her nose. Ellis Vargo didn't flinch. That was the first thing that struck me. No surprise. No irritation. Just that thin, dry smile of a man who had arranged every move on the board before anyone else even knew there was a game. "You can't file that," I said. My voice came out low, but it carried. Paper stopped moving. A stapler froze in midair. Somewhere behind me, the deputy from the hallway exhaled like he already knew this morning had just gone bad. Ellis Vargo rested one hand on the lid of the box. "I already am." I stepped closer and saw the black marker on the tab again. My ranch parcel number. 6,800 acres reduced to a row of digits on a county file. The same land my father bled into. The The same creek bottoms I'd cleared with my own hands. The same winter pasture where the frost hit silver before sunrise. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face still. Then I saw Hoa Bennett. Not in the hall. Not at the courtroom doors. Inside the intake room, standing off to the side near the copy machine. One hand wrapped around a manila envelope. Posture straight. Expression calm. Too calm. The machine behind her clicked and whined, feeding out copies one clean sheet at a time. That was when the floor shifted under me. I'd been bracing for an ambush from Wade Mercer and his lawyer. I hadn't prepared for Hoa Bennett to be part of the machinery. I told you not to come through here, I said. I told you to trust me until noon, Hoa Bennett said. No apology. No panic. Just that sentence, flat and measured, like she'd rehearsed it in the dark. Ellis Vargo slid a packet across the counter toward the clerk. Petition to confirm transfer, supporting affidavits, notice of compliance, and corrected legal description. Corrected. That word hit harder than the rest. Corrected meant somebody had touched the map, touched the boundaries, touched the legal spine of the ranch itself. I moved for the packet, and the deputy caught my forearm before my fingers reached paper. Not rough. Worse than rough. Official. Don't, he said. I looked at the top page upside down. My name was there. Grant Whitaker. So was Hoa Bennett's. And under that, in thick county formatting, language that treated my land like a completed transaction instead of a theft still breathing. I turned to Hoa Bennett. You signed this. I signed what I had to sign, Hoa Bennett said. Read the exhibit list. I couldn't. The deputy still had my arm, and Ellis Vargo was already feeding pages toward the intake, slot one measured stack at a time. The clerk stamped the first page. The sound cracked through the room like a rifle shot. Filed. There it was. The first real wound. Not a threat. Not gossip. Not a hearing notice pinned to my gate. A county stamp with today's date and my acreage under it. Wade Mercer stepped into the doorway right then, as if the smell of paper and blood had called him in. Expensive boots, pressed jacket, polished belt buckle, all of it too clean for a ranch county. He looked past me to the clerk, then to Ellis Vargo, then to Hoa Bennett. Satisfaction moved across his face, slow and ugly. I appreciate everybody finally acting like adults, Wade Mercer said. I wanted to put him through the copy machine. Instead, I looked back at the exhibit list clipped behind the petition. One line had been highlighted in yellow. Emergency Judicial Disqualification Notice. The yellow highlighter bled through the paper like a bruise. I kept my thumb on the edge of the exhibit list and let Wade Mercer enjoy his little moment. The room smelled like burnt coffee, old toner, and the rain that had followed us in on our boots. Somewhere behind the records counter, a copier whined and snapped. Nobody in that office spoke for 3 full seconds, and in county time, that was a confession. Emergency Judicial Disqualification Notice. The phrase sat there too neatly, too fast, too useful. I had sat on enough benches and read enough filings to know what belonged in a real emergency and what got stapled in after the fact to make a theft look orderly. My farm had not been sold because the law moved clean. It had been shoved downhill. Ellis Vargo folded his hands over his briefcase and gave me the kind of calm look men use when they think paperwork has already buried the body. Hoa Bennett did not meet my eyes. That bothered me more than Wade smiling. I asked for the filing time. Not the date. The time. The county legal staff woman at the counter froze with one hand over the keyboard. I heard the tiny click of her nail hitting plastic. Ellis Vargo answered before she could. It was processed in sequence. That was not an answer. That was a curtain. I slid the exhibit list back across the counter and asked again. What time was the notice entered? And what time was the sale packet accepted? The woman looked toward Naomi Pike's empty station, then toward the office and back with the blinds half closed. I had seen that look before too. It was the look of somebody deciding whether loyalty was worth a witness subpoena. Finally, she turned the monitor a 1/4 inch. Not enough for Ellis Vargo to notice. Enough for me. The disqualification notice had been entered 9 minutes after the sale packet was stamped received. 9 minutes. I felt something cold and sharp settle under my ribs. You do not disqualify a judge from a matter after the transaction tied to that matter is already in the building unless somebody is building an excuse, not following a rule. Wade Mercer's smile tightened when he saw my face change. He knew I had found a nail sticking out of his clean little fence. I asked for proof of service. If an emergency notice had been filed, I should have been notified. There should have been a call log, a delivery acknowledgement, a certified mailing record, something. Nothing came out right away. The county legal staff woman clicked through 3 screens. Her breathing changed. Behind me, boots scraped tile as 2 of my Whitaker Ranch hands shifted their weight near the doorway. They had driven me in and stood silent the whole time. 6 men who knew fence lines better than court procedure, but they could smell a bad brand from 50 yards off. "No certified mail entry," she said softly. Ellis Vargo stepped in then, voice smooth as oil. "County systems are not always complete." That line almost made me laugh. Not complete. That was one way to describe a notice nobody served, filed after the sale packet arrived, in a case where the buyer was already standing in the hallway wearing victory like cologne. So I started walking it backward in my head. The signatures. The rushed meeting. The papers brought in stacks instead of sequence. Hoa Bennett urging me to let county counsel streamline the filing because timing mattered. Ellis Vargo insisting the investor group needed clean closure before the quarter ended. Wade Mercer appearing too early, too informed, too certain. And through all of it, one silence that suddenly screamed louder than any lie. Hoa Bennett had never once said the disqualification notice existed. Not when she had me initial the disclosure tabs. Not when she told me the county needed speed. Not when she avoided my calls the night before. If she knew, she hid it. The fluorescent lights in the county administration hallway hummed like trapped hornets, and the smell of burnt coffee drifted out of a vending alcove while I stood there with a yellow file folder cutting into my palm. By then I had already stopped asking myself whether Hoa Bennett had lied. The only question left was how deep she had laid the trap. Ordinary channels. That was the phrase I kept repeating in my head like it still meant something. I started with the county records counter because paper, at least, had the decency to leave fingerprints. Naomi Pike was behind the glass, shoulders tight, lips pressed flat when she saw me walk up. For county legal staff moved in the background behind her, shuffling folders, keeping their heads down with the kind of silence people use when they know a fire is already burning and they do not want to be seen holding a match. I slid the disqualification notice under the slot. "I want the chain of filing," I said. "Who submitted this, when it hit the record, and why I was never served." Naomi Pike looked at the notice, then at me. Her fingers twitched toward it, then stopped. "You can request that in writing. I am requesting it now. You'll need Form 18C. I almost laughed. 6,800 acres of family ground had changed hands, and now I was being handed a form with a staple bent sideways. But I filled it out right there, leaning on the counter while the cheap ballpoint scratched across the page. I filed the challenge to the sale. I demanded a stay. I requested notice records, service logs, internal routing, every dry little breadcrumb that should have protected me. By noon I was in the clerk hearing room, wood-paneled walls, air conditioning too cold, my own pulse louder than the vent above me. I expected delay. I expected bureaucracy. What I did not expect was Hoa Bennett already sitting at the opposite table, navy jacket buttoned, legal pad open, tabs color-coded like she had packed my defeat the night before. Ellis Vargo stood beside her, smooth as wax, one hand resting on a stack of certified copies. That was when I understood the first ugly truth. I had not caught up to her. I had walked exactly where she expected me to walk. The hearing officer barely looked at me before Ellis Vargo began speaking. He moved fast, but not sloppily. He had timestamps, affidavits, proof of publication, receipt acknowledgments, transfer authorizations, and a notarized packet bearing my initials on pages I remembered signing, because Hoa Bennett had told me they were routine disclosures needed to keep the county from slowing escrow. Routine. A word sharp enough to skin a man alive. I pushed back. I said the disqualification notice had been buried, not disclosed. I said the service looked engineered. I said the sale had moved unnaturally fast, that Wade Mercer's investor group had been circling before the record was complete. I expected Hoa Bennett to crack then, to get defensive, to overplay it. She didn't. Hoa Bennett waited until I finished, then stood with that same calm voice she used when negotiating seed contracts and fuel deliveries. No tremor, no apology, no anger. She answered every point with a document, every question with a date, every accusation with a signature, an acknowledgement, a procedure. She even knew which memory I would reach for. "You initialed the disclosure tabs," she said, not looking at me, but at the hearing officer. "Each one. Not signed. Initialed. A smaller act. Easier to rush. Easier to weaponize. I felt the room shift. The challenge was denied without drama. No raised voices. No gavel. Just a stamp, a summary, and the dry scrape of paper sliding back across polished wood. My request for an immediate stay was rejected. The transfer stood. Whatever happened next would not happen through a complaint window in a county form. Outside, the late afternoon heat hit like an opened furnace. Gravel popped under my boots as I walked to my truck. Heat rolled off the hood of my truck in wavering sheets, carrying the bitter smell of dust and hot antifreeze. I had one hand on the door when I heard heels striking concrete behind me. Quick and uneven, not the careful rhythm of somebody confident. I turned and saw Naomi Pike clutching a cardboard records box against her ribs like it might split open if she breathed too hard. Her face had gone pale under the courthouse parking lot glare. "You didn't get this from me," Naomi Pike said. The box hit the bed of my truck with a hollow thud. Inside were file jackets, plat maps, and a county utility overlay marked with orange grease pencil. Not the deed trail I had been fighting over all week. Bigger than that. Dirt roads, water easements, abandoned pipeline corridors, flood control channels, and a proposed industrial access route that cut straight through the spine of my land like a knife. That's when I understood the sale had never been about pasture, cattle, or even acreage. It was about position. My 6,800 acres sat between county water expansion plans and a private freight spur Wade Mercer had been trying to push through under 3 different shell companies. My ranch wasn't the prize by itself. It was the keystone. Whoever controlled it could stitch together everything around it and turn half the valley into a logistics corridor. Naomi Pike kept looking back toward the courthouse doors. Ellis Vargo has been moving paper through side channels for months. Right-of-way summaries. Quiet valuation adjustments. Fast-track memos with no public notice. County legal staff logged them as routine infrastructure review. For county legal staff, I knew every face. I knew which ones avoided eye contact that morning. I thumbed through the stack. One memo had Hoa Bennett's signature on a business authorization page. Another had her initials beside a parcel access agreement tied to Wade Mercer's investor group. 5 land syndicate investors, all listed through layered entities, all circling the same corridor. My land sat in the middle of every map like a heart somebody planned to cut out clean. I felt something colder than anger settle in. Greed had been the easy explanation. Greed fit in a sentence. This didn't. Why bring this to me now? I asked. Naomi Pike swallowed hard. Because the last packet came in this morning. And because Hoa Bennett wasn't approving final transfers anymore. She tapped a red-tabbed folder with 2 fingers. She was objecting. I opened it right there against the truck bed. The paper smelled like toner and old dust. Inside was a draft objection, and signed but marked for filing, warning that the acquisition structure exposed participating parties to fraud claims and unlawful coercion if original ownership challenges surfaced. There were handwritten notes in the margin. Hoa Bennett's handwriting. Sharp, slanted, familiar. This goes too far. Not what we agreed. Stop before Vargo Records Phase 2. I stared at those words until the parking lot noise thinned out around me. Too bad for her. Conscience had shown up after my land was gone. But that didn't erase what I was looking at. Hoa Bennett hadn't just sold me out and walked away richer. Somewhere between the closing table and whatever came next, she had realized she was standing inside a machine larger than her own betrayal. And machines like that didn't let people step out clean. Naomi Pike lowered her voice. There's more. A hold request was entered and then deleted. Same day, same terminal. Ellis Vargo's authorization. Deleted by who? Naomi Pike didn't answer fast enough. I didn't need her to. If Ellis Vargo had buried Hoa Bennett's objection, then Hoa Bennett wasn't steering this anymore. She was either being contained, bought off harder than before, or scared into silence. None of those possibilities helped me sleep. One of my ranch hands called just then. I answered and heard wind, diesel, and panic. A county survey crew had pulled up at the south gate with marked stakes and temporary fencing. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right then. Diesel fumes hit me before I reached the south gate. The smell sat heavy over the pasture, mixing with wet cedar posts, churned mud, and the sharp chemical bite of orange survey paint. By the time my truck rolled to a stop, 2 county pickups were already angled across the gravel, hazard lights pulsing red across my fence line like a heartbeat gone wrong. One of the Whitaker ranch hands was standing by the cattle guard, hat in his fist, jaw tight. Beyond him, 3 men in reflective vests were driving stakes into my grass with steel mallets. Each strike rang out flat and final. Temporary fencing lay coiled in the bed of a trailer like they meant to skin the place in sections. I stepped out, boots sinking half an inch into soft ground, and held up my hand before anybody could start talking over each other. A woman from the county legal staff stood beside a clipboard, trying not to meet my eyes. I recognized her from the courthouse annex. One of 4. Good at looking busy, better at looking away. Who authorized this? I asked. She swallowed, then gave me the answer I already hated. Emergency Access Survey under Transfer Compliance. Transfer Compliance. Fancy words for theft in a tie. I took the paper from her hand and read fast. Parcel references. Interim possession language. A recording stamp from that morning. Ellis Vargo's fingerprints were all over it, even if his name only appeared once. Wade Mercer wanted the south boundary marked before any challenge could breathe. What challenge? One of the surveyors asked, too casually. That was the moment the old unease hardened into shape. Not fear. Recognition. Somebody on their side knew a challenge was coming, which meant somebody on my side had not gone quiet by accident. Hoa Bennett had done something after all, or tried to. Ellis Vargo had moved too quickly for this to be routine. He was not cleaning up paperwork anymore. He was sealing a door. I folded the page once and told the survey crew to stop. They kept hammering. That sound did something to me. Not anger exactly. Anger is hot. This was colder than that. Colder than the steel wire humming in the wind beside me. Colder than the mud drying on my cuffs. I looked past the trucks toward the ridge and made a decision I had spent years avoiding. Take pictures of every stake. I told the ranch hand nearest me. All 6 of you. Fence line, license plates, faces, everything. Don't touch anybody. Just document. Then I got back in my truck and drove away from my own land. Not home. Not to my lawyer. Not to the sheriff. To the courthouse. The building sat downtown in its usual sandstone silence, square and old and smug. The flag out front snapped in the wind. I parked in the rear lot where county vehicles lined up in neat rows, went through the staff entrance, and used a key card nobody on that ranch had ever seen me carry. The click of the lock sounded louder than the survey hammers. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over wax tile and old bulletin boards. A bailiff looked up from the security desk, saw my face, then saw the badge clipped inside my coat. Not Grant Whitaker, the ranch owner. Not the man they thought had been buried under land filings and dirty signatures. I had spent the last 18 months serving under another name inside the county judicial system, by appointment so quiet almost nobody connected it to me. I stayed off my farm's daily operations for one reason. A corruption probe that had started as whispers around probate transfers and land seizures, then kept circling the same names like vultures. Ellis Vargo, county records, Shell buyers, development money. Wade Mercer had been the smoke. I had been waiting for fire. Naomi Pike was standing outside records when I turned the corner. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. Her eyes went wide, then steadied. So it's true, she said. You tell me. Her voice dropped. Fluorescent lights buzzed over the records hallway, flat and white, making Naomi Pike look even more exhausted than she probably felt. A copier thumped somewhere behind the security door. The air smelled like paper dust, burnt coffee, and rain drying off cheap tile. She kept her voice low, like the walls were listening. They moved the hearing, she said. Not canceled. Reassigned. I watched her face instead of her hands. Hands could lie. Faces usually lied slower. To who? Naomi swallowed. Special probate review. Emergency docket. Sealed assignment until this morning. That hit me wrong. Too neat. Too fast. Ellis Vargo had spent weeks choking every ordinary channel with motions, objections, corrected filings, and delays dressed up like procedure. Men like him only rushed when they thought the finish line had already been bought. Why tell me now? I asked. Her jaw tightened. Because I finally saw the internal routing. The sale package, the tax affidavits, the transfer notices, they weren't just pushed through. They were stacked to land in one room, in front of one authority, on one day. She leaned closer. Wade Mercer isn't trying to win the farm in the open. He's trying to make the theft look permanent. That answered one old question and opened a worse one. Naomi slid a thin county envelope into my hand. No dramatic flourish. Just paper against skin. This is the corrected hearing notice before it was replaced in the system. I shouldn't have a copy. Inside was the courtroom number and timestamp. Department C, 10:30. Special review. And who's presiding? I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the courtroom wing. You need to see it yourself. The walk there felt longer than the whole damn building should have allowed. Every step clicked off polished floor under my boots. Two of the county legal staff stood near the clerk's station outside Department C, whispering with the stiff, careful posture of people trying not to be seen whispering. Down the hall, Ellis Vargo came through the double doors carrying a leather file box like he owned the air around him. Wade Mercer followed half a step behind, silver tie straight, smile thin as a knife blade. The 5 land syndicate investors were already seated on the benches inside when the doors opened, spread out just enough to pretend they hadn't arrived together. Ellis Vargo saw me and almost smiled. That alone told me he thought the trap had already shut. Grant, he said, smooth as oil on water. Didn't expect you to attend. I've been surprised a lot lately, I said. Wade Mercer looked past me, checking for weakness the way men like him always did. This won't take long. Maybe that was the first honest thing he'd said. Naomi Pike didn't come in with us. She stopped at the threshold, shoulders rigid, like crossing that line would make her part of something she could never walk back from. Maybe it would. Inside, the courtroom carried that old wood smell I've known half my life. Varnish, paper, dust, and the faint metallic bite of radiator heat. A bailiff I knew from years back stood near the rail, but he didn't meet my eyes. The 6 Whitaker Ranch hands sat packed into the back row, hats in their laps, broad shoulders filling the bench. Nobody spoke. Even silence sounded tense in that room. Ellis Vargo strode to counsel table and began arranging papers with the confidence of a man setting the table for his own victory. Wade Mercer stayed standing, one hand on the chair, scanning the room like he was measuring acreage instead of people. He expected a rubber stamp. He expected me in the gallery, beaten down, reduced to watching strangers divide up my life. The side door behind the bench opened. Wood creaked. Fabric shifted. Somebody in the back inhaled so sharply I heard it over the radiator. I stepped forward, not to the gallery, but through the gate. Ellis Vargo's hand stopped over his file. Wade Mercer's expression didn't crack all at once. It came apart in pieces, certainty first, then color, then breath. The oath hit the room like a hammer on split oak. Short, clean, irreversible. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The old radiator along the wall let out a tired clank. I could smell floor wax, paper dust, and the faint bitter edge of burned coffee drifting in from the clerk's station. Every sound seemed too loud now. A chair leg dragging, a pen cap snapping, Wade Mercer's shallow breathing 3 tables away. I took my seat behind the bench, and for one suspended second, nobody moved. Then the whole room remembered what a courtroom was. One of the county legal staff rose so fast her chair bumped the rail. Ellis Vargo objected before he even had footing under him, his voice coming out dry and sharp. He said conflict. He said prejudice. He said I had no place hearing a matter tied to my own land. I let him spend the breath. Then I looked down at the transfer order already waiting in the file, stamped the night before by the circuit administrative judge 2 counties over. Temporary assignment. Special hearing authority. Limited purpose. Signed, dated, valid. Naomi Pike had gotten it where it needed to go after she handed over what she'd been hiding. That was the first crack in Ellis Vargo's posture. Not fear yet, just math going bad in real time. I told him the record would reflect his objection and its denial. My voice sounded flatter than I felt. Years on the bench teach you that anger is expensive. Precision is cheap and deadly. Hoa Bennett was called first. The sound of her boots crossing the hardwood cut through me harder than I expected. I had known that stride for years, across barn aisles before sunrise, across feed invoices at my kitchen table, across dry pasture under August heat when we were still building something that felt honest. Now it carried her to the witness stand. She didn't look at me when she sat. Ellis Vargo tried to control the air fast. He led her through numbers, signatures, procedural language, all the dead words men like him used to dress theft in office clothes. Emergency sale, delinquent obligations, necessary liquidation, consent implied through prior business authority. He wanted the room buried in paperwork before truth could get oxygen. But paper has weight, and lies do too. You can hear the difference when enough of them stack up. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I asked Hoa Bennett when she first spoke to Wade Mercer about dividing the 6,800 acres. She said after the foreclosure notices began. Naomi Pike shifted in the second row. I reached for the exhibit folder she had slipped to special counsel that morning. Inside was the county timestamp log, the intake scan, and the original notice sequence. The first delinquency notice had been filed 12 days after Hoa Bennett met Wade Mercer at the Stockyard Diner. Not before. After. A small sound moved through the gallery. One of my 6 ranch hands muttered something under his breath, then stopped. Hoa Bennett finally looked at me. I asked if she understood the difference between financial distress and manufactured distress. Ellis Vargo objected again. I overruled him again. Then I placed the maintenance escrow ledger into evidence. The one everyone had been pretending did not exist. It showed reserve funds large enough to cover every claimed shortage tied to fencing, water access, and road upkeep. Money had been rerouted through Shell service contracts approved by Ellis Vargo and directed toward holding companies linked to Wade Mercer's 5 investors. That changed the room. Not because anyone suddenly grew a conscience. Because fraud had just become simple enough for everybody to understand. Hoa Bennett's mouth parted, but no words came. So I asked the question Ellis Vargo had spent months trying to outrun. Did she sign those authorizations because she believed the land had to be sold, or because she was told refusal would expose her to criminal liability created by documents she had never drafted? Silence. The old wall clock ticked. Naomi Pike stared straight ahead, pale and rigid. Naomi Pike finally moved. It was small at first. Just the scrape of her chair legs against the courtroom floor and the dry sound of her swallowing. But in that room, after months of lies wrapped in polished language, that little sound landed like a rifle shot. She turned toward me, then toward the judge's bench behind me, and I saw it happen in her face. Fear giving way to exhaustion. Exhaustion giving way to anger. She was told, Naomi Pike said, her voice thin but steadying as it came out, that if she didn't sign, the county would refer her for fraud tied to altered tax parcel maps and delinquency notices. She looked directly at Hoa Bennett. And those notices were generated after the ownership coding was changed in the records queue. A pulse of noise rolled through the gallery. Boots shifting. Someone whispering too loud. One of the county legal staff dropped a pen, and it clattered across the rail. Ellis Vargo stood up so fast his chair kicked backward. Speculation, he snapped. No, Naomi Pike said, louder this time. I processed the queue. I saw the override trail. The authorization path didn't begin with Hoa Bennett. It began with Ellis Vargo's office, routed through a temporary review flag, then attached to a county sale package that should never have existed. That was the moment the air changed. Not because anybody suddenly grew a conscience. Because the lie finally had a paper trail with a witness attached to it. I kept my hands flat on the wood in front of me and let the silence work. The bench behind me felt heavier than oak. It felt like every long year I had spent believing the law only meant something if the right people were willing to stand inside it when it got ugly. Wade Mercer's face had gone the color of wet cement. He reached for his briefcase, maybe looking for a contract, maybe looking for courage, but his hand shook too much to hide it. The 5 land syndicate investors behind him stopped looking like men buying progress and started looking like men calculating exposure. I asked Naomi Pike one more question. Was the farm ever lawfully abandoned, defaulted, or eligible for forced county liquidation? No, she said. The word hit harder than anything else that morning. No, not complex, not arguable, not buried in procedure. Just no. The 6,800 acres they tried to strip from me had never been theirs to move. Hoa Bennett finally spoke, and when she did, the steel had gone out of her voice. I thought if I signed, I was preventing a seizure. Ellis Vargo told me there was already a criminal file forming around forged compliance gaps. He said refusing would make me the target. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. The sleepless eyes. The rigid jaw. The woman who had stood beside me for years and still let fear put her hand where it never should have gone. What you believed, I said, doesn't erase what you signed. She nodded once, like a person accepting the wait at last. The ruling came fast after that. Faster than any of them expected. The sale package was voided. Every transfer attached to the fraudulent authorization chain was frozen, then unwound. Emergency possession reverted fully and immediately. My farm was mine and every record that mattered before the lunch hour bell even rang. Then came the part none of them had seen coming. I turned, stepped away from counsel table, and walked to the side door behind the rail. The hinges gave that same old low groan I had heard 1,000 times before dawn hearings and probate calendars. I put my hand on the frame, came around, and took my seat behind the judge's bench. That was when Wade Mercer stopped breathing for a second. That was when Ellis Vargo's mouth actually fell open. That was when Hoa Bennett understood the one thing she had never fully asked herself. She had not sold a desperate old rancher out from under his boots.